Welcome to the Painting of the Week podcast, where we look at some of the most significant paintings throughout history. Introducing your hosts, Phil Grabsky and Laura Bentham.
Welcome to this week's Painting of the Week. And it's one of our specials. Laura and I are not in our little studio in Brighton, but we've come out not so far. It's about a 45-minute drive from Brighton to the wonderful Petworth House in Petworth. I thoroughly recommend anyone comes to Petworth House for lots of reasons, not least its extraordinary art collection. And some of you may know it is well known for having a wonderful selection of Turners, 20 in its permanent collection, as well as other works. Right now, it has a Turner exhibition on, which we're going to talk about, because we're very lucky to be in the presence, or have with us, Dr. Emily Knight, who is the property curator here, but also the curator of the exhibition. First and foremost, the painting that we're going to be talking about is here all the time. As I say, it's in the permanent collection. It's on the wall of the carved room, which we're definitely going to talk about. For those of you who want to see what the painting looks like, if you go to seventh-art.com or the YouTube channel, the painting is called The Lake Petworth Sunset Fighting Bucks by Turner, and you can look at the painting while we talk about it. First and foremost, though, I'm going to ask Emily just to explain a little bit about the exhibition. Now, the exhibition is on at Petworth. It began on the 21st of June. We're recording this in the middle of July 2025. The exhibition is on until the 16th of November 2025. And if you're listening to this podcast before that date, as we have seen the exhibition, I thoroughly recommend you come and see it. But Emily, hello.
Hello.
And could you tell me, first of all, before we talk about this specific painting, what prompted the exhibition and what is the curatorial line of the exhibition?
Well, 2025 is the 250th anniversary since Turner's birth. And because he had such a close and long-standing relationship with the Third Earl of Egremont here at Petworth, we thought it was a fantastic opportunity to shine a light on that relationship and the amazing body of work that came from it. So our exhibition is called Turner's Vision at Petworth, and it focuses on Turner's artistic preoccupations during his many visits to Petworth in the 1820s and 30s in particular. So we have a number of preparatory works. His first commission from the Third Earl of Egremont, called Dewy Morning, which is a view of the house from the park. And it's a wonderful example of how Turner is, even within quite a traditional format, playing with proportion and working towards the most pleasing composition. And we have a number of these studies that he made on blue paper, celebrating all the things that make Turner's work so celebrated: interest in light and how it plays on water, his use of materials. So a lot of these sketches are using watercolour and a more opaque body colour. And it really just shows that here at Petworth he had the means and the resources and the support from the Third Earl of Egremont to explore the landscape, to experiment artistically, as well as receiving direct commissions from the Third Earl, including for the card room where we are now, which houses the painting that we'll be discussing today.
So later this year, the Tate is going to be doing an exhibition called Turner Constable, and it's marking both the 250th birthday of Turner, which is this year, and the 250th anniversary of the birth of Constable, which is next year. Both artists, I know, came here. In our day and age, we don't tend to associate artists with the nobility that still exists. We don't tend to see the nobility as being the patrons of art in quite the same way, perhaps sadly. What prompted Turner to come here? Did he come here because it had an art collection that he wanted to visit? Or was he invited by Egremont because Egremont respected him already as an artist in, 1810, whatever the first visit was.
Before Turner came to Petworth as a guest, the Sardal had already acquired work by him. So the Egremont Sea piece, which we can see in the North Gallery, he'd acquired some years earlier. But the Sardal was known for having this fantastic collection that was not only the result of his own sort of acquisition and commissioning, but also the work of his ancestors, really from the 17th century, mid-17th century onwards. So Petworth was known for having this incredible collection. There are accounts of it. And so when Turner came, that was certainly an attraction. There is a drawing in Tate's collection from the end of the 18th century, not of Petworth House's interior or specifically of the landscape, but of the town, which shows that he'd been in the area. And we know that he came here for that first commission in 1809, a painting that was exhibited the following year, a painting of the house. But when he started coming regularly, the collection certainly would have been an attraction. We think of Petworth during that period as a sort of satellite academy of the British art world, because Turner was not the only artist. You mentioned Constable. He described Petworth as that house of art in a letter where he's sort of lamenting the fact that the Sardal hasn't acquired anything by him. But there were other artists like C.R. Leslie, whose work is represented in the collection, the sculptor Chantry, the painter Thomas Phillips, the sculptor Carew, who worked almost exclusively for the Sardal in the early 19th century. And so there were many artists coming here. There was a real buzzing social life as well. And I think it's easy to be quite kind of serious and earnest when thinking about these moments, but also there are letters and written accounts of it being a place where artists were teasing each other, where they were dining together, where they were fishing together. So I think it was a combination both of the incredible riches of the house itself, but also the life here, and as I say, the freedom that Turner had to explore the landscape, to fish in the pond, to make studies that were really for his own record, that didn't need to be necessarily worked up into anything more final for his patron.
It is one of the things that I think people overlook a little bit with artists, is that although sometimes they present themselves, or we understand them as being quite singular characters, they actually often seek out community, not least the community of other artists, because they're just passionate about art and they want to talk about art and they want to talk about new materials and who have you seen and where have you been. And clearly Turner is somebody who is avaricious in wanting to be the best possible artist that he could be, and living at this remarkable time. Britain's at war at this point, obviously fighting the French. So I guess some of the people coming through Petworth would have been coming back from the campaigns in France or Spain or wherever it might have been, with lots of stories to tell. But also with the Industrial Revolution has begun, but we know from our My National Gallery film, where Michael Palin shows Rain, Steam, Speed, how someone like Turner is reflecting perhaps an old age passing and a new age coming. Fighting Temeraire is another great example, isn't it? And when you come to Petworth, what's so noticeable now is it's just kind of room after room of sculptures and furniture, beautiful furniture, and many, many, many paintings. So I'm sure he would have felt at home here. Should we imagine that he would come here for a period of time and stay here, have his own room, a bit like Caravaggio in the Palazzo Madama, where one assumes he had his room, he had his own studio? Or would he come and do sketches and go back to London? What do we know about his kind of day-to-day at Petworth? He'd
stay here, as did other artists. And there is a space at Petworth called the Old Library. The house is owned by the Trust, but the Egremont family still live here. And this is on the private side. But we know that was somewhere where Turner and other artists were working. In Tate's collection, there's a huge body of work that he made at Petworth, including some of these sketches, most of the sketches that I mentioned earlier on blue paper. And so we've got his depictions of the interior at Petworth, including this space called the Old Library. And for a long time, we spoke about that as Turner's studio. But there are also written accounts of him being very private about his work at this time, particularly when he was working on things for the third Earl. So there's an anecdote where it's described how he's working on these paintings for the dining room, the carved room, but his studio he keeps locked, and he isn't welcoming people in there apart from, of course, the third Earl. And the sculpture Chantry tries to kind of mimic his steps and knock on the door to gain entry. And so we know that, he was staying here and he had spaces to work. And we know equally that artists were invited to take certain things down from the main hang in the house and study them up close. So the third Earl was both a kind of passionate and enthusiastic collector, but he was really supporting the work of these artists and their development as well.
Oh, sorry. Just one thing. Do you actually let the third Earl into his room? He was that close with him that he would have seen the sketches?
Absolutely, yes. So? And I think that one of the things that we talk about in the exhibition here is about that process of coming to an agreement on the final 4 paintings that were selected for the carved room. Mm-hmm. And while we don't have, very detailed sort of minutes like you'd get at a museum meeting to get today about what was chosen, there are 6 associated full-scale studies, 4 of which are quite closely related to the 4 paintings in this space. There are certain changes that have been made which suggest a kind of dialogue between artist and patron as they reach a decision about the arrangement. And I think that's also what makes Petworth such an important place for Turner, to have that connection with a patron where they are deciding what's going to be the most effective thing in this space. We're standing here in the carved room. The windows are all on one side, facing west, so you get a lot of afternoon light. So you can imagine them having conversations about how they appear at different times of day. The fact that they all represent sunset views, and this is a west-facing room. So they give us a lot of... It's a sort of visual evidence, it's visual clues of those sorts of conversations that were happening between the two of them.
So we asked you to choose your favourite painting. So of the 4, you've chosen this one. First of all, could you now take the opportunity to describe what it is that we're seeing, and then why you chose this one?
Favourite is a tough word.
I agree with that.
One of the scheme. But I think what I love about this painting is its direct connection to Petworth Park, and also that very rich story that I was just alluding to about the preparatory work and the changes that were made to the composition. So we're looking at this painting. It's a sort of double square format, and by that I mean it's very rectangular. It's a sort of it almost looks like a sort of predella to the portrait displayed above. It's at seated eye level, so it's...
I'm just going to interrupt. I'm just going to explain that there are portraits hanging above which are exactly the width. So Emily's already explained to me before we started that Turner was essentially told, this is the space. And I wanted to ask, is it exactly 2 to 1? Is it exactly 2 squares?
There it's not totally precise, but it's pretty close.
Okay.
It's pretty close.
So it's almost like CinemaScope. I mean, this is
a sort of panoramic view in a way. But it's important to mention that with the portrait above and it's sitting down below, because this is a room I mentioned before that the third Earl adapted in the early 19th century. It had previously been around half the size, and we are standing in the end that was previously a tapestry room. And he knocked through to create this incredibly grand dining space with 4 windows that run along the west side of the room, all of which were lengthened in the early 19th century with steps out onto the terrace. So there was this very intimate and close connection between the landscape and the interior. You could lift the windows and just step right out into the landscape beyond. And that's the thing that makes these paintings again so special, because if you imagine yourself seated in this room at a dining table looking at Capability Brown's designed landscape, you can then turn around and see Turner's interpretation of it. And that's what we see in this view. So it's taken from in front of the house on the west front, which was the original entrance to the house. and it is a sunset view. We can see Lawn Hill sloping up to the right with trees on top, and a huge number of fallow deer. Petworth has an incredibly large collection of fallow deer, herd of fallow deer, I should say. I can sound like a curator there. A herd of fallow deer, and you can see that he's populated a huge amount of this landscape in the painting with these fallow deer. So it's a really characteristic thing. And the title of Fighting Bucks you can see just in the lower right-hand corner here, with these deer with their large antlers, sort of butting heads. I'm sure there's a more precise term that can be used for that. And also some of these pigs in the foreground as well. And you can see over on the left-hand side of the painting, underneath trees, a cricket match going on. And there is still a cricket club at Petworth. So it's still, it's a lovely connection to how some of the land here is still used. As I say, it's a sunset view. So the colour of the sky is bright, it's luminous, but it's got this kind of warmth, that strong yellow light that he was so known for, and we can see in so many of the preparatory works. So for me, it's just the most amazing thing because it is so specific to here. There's a sort of looseness and freedom with how he's presenting it. It's an incredibly dramatic sunset. Yeah. But the fact that what you're looking at here is what you see out of the window is for me the most extraordinary thing, and something you can only really get at a place like Petworth.
Now, at this time, how radical a style was this? We were talking late
1820s.
Late 1820s. So he's in his mid-40s. We're still kind of ahead of the Impressionists. Obviously, they later are much impressed by the Turners that they see, particularly when they come to England in 1870 during the Franco-Prussian War. So that's ways down the line. So were other artists painting like this, or was Turner really on the cusp of something, revolutionary in artistic terms?
I mean, he was very established. He was a little bit older than his mid-40s, so he was definitely an established artist by this point. But I think the thing that separated him from other artists is this luminosity. And you can see here, almost in the centre of the canvas, the sun. I think when we think about how this originally would have appeared, that again would have been that thing that we associate so much with Turner, that we see in so much of his work, of this sort of central light source that just illuminates the whole canvas and feels like light is almost coming from the painting rather than absorbing the sort of artificial lights thrown in its direction. And so I think that's the thing that sort of set him apart. And I think one of the things we were talking about before is in the planning for the exhibition, thinking about this commission, I thought it'd be amazing to sort of walk through the landscape, to have a trail for our visitors where you could stand in Turner's footsteps. But it's really hard to do that. And even though in some of the studies we can say, oh, that's Lawn Hill, that's Upperton Monument, they're either painted so freely or he's playing so much with different elements of that composition that it's hard to be precise about it. And if you compare it to the work of Constable, and it'll be interesting to see how Tate deal with this in their exhibition later this year, but Constable was so focused on place and that sort of precision of place, and capturing things so precisely. So if we think about all of those oil sketches he made of Dedham Vale, he's recording on the backs of them precise times of day, exact weather conditions. Whereas for Turner, for me, the thing that distinguishes him is this sense of something that feels kind of like universal in a way. I mentioned also about this ability to study the collection. We know that he hugely admired the work of the French 17th century painter Claude, whose work is in the collection here, and he made a very close version of that that's now at Tate. And that interest in this warm light, this sunset light, is something that is such a sort of key feature of Turner's work. And so that's where I think, that he was sort of quite different in his age and quite pioneering in how he was painting during this period.
Can I just ask one question? So with the sunsets, was it always sunsets? Because these 4 are sunsets, aren't they?
Yeah, but not
Did he
always.
just become always more obsessed with sunsets as he got older?
I think, well, for this scheme, certainly, it's the sort of unifying motif that brings them all together.
Because of the way the room is facing? Or
that could have been a reason.
Okay.
Yeah, that could have been a reason. It was something he was generally interested in as an artist. But as we've seen in the exhibition with these other studies he made, he's looking at sort of twilights, he's looking at the morning. So he's looking at different times of day and getting a sense of how that affects the way that we experience and understand the landscape. But for here, it's the sunset that unites them.
Okay.
There was an awful lot of criticism of the Impressionists for the sketchiness or the unfinished nature as perceived by the critics of their works. And famously, it is reported that the director of the National Gallery said, "I'd rather turn this building into a church than have an Impressionist painting hanging." But decades earlier, in a room where one would imagine that there would be royalty dining and all sorts of nobility and all sorts of conservative individuals, the Earl has decided to have 4 quite radical paintings. What does that say about him? But also, have we any sense of how the paintings were received, or any reaction to the paintings? I mean, would those people have sat and dined and thought, well, what exactly is that? Or was Turner established enough?
I mean, he was certainly established by this point, by the point that people would have been looking at it. But that's not to say he wasn't still an artist that people sort of discussed in a very impassioned way. Yeah. And in a way, perhaps it's something about this being a dining space, this being a place of conversation, that they have these paintings at eye level as you sit down, that would have prompted that kind of conversation. But it's interesting seeing, and you can see this as you walk through Petworth House, particularly in the North Gallery, which was never a domestic space. It was only ever a place to showcase the incredible collection here that sort of grew from the sort of mid-18th century with his father's collection of ancient sculpture. It was then extended 2 more times by the third Earl, just for more space to put his ever-growing collection. And it's interesting, when you look around somewhere like that, the things that he was interested in. So there are a number of landscape paintings. He's interested in Shakespeare and in genre painting. So you can really, I think, here build a picture of the kind of things that interested him, the kind of things that inspired his curiosity. You get a real sense of it here in how it's displayed.
Do you ever worry that perhaps people these days are perhaps less interested in art than they may have been 150, 200 years ago?
I think the sort of visual world, is that the right way to describe it? We are bombarded with imagery so much every day. And I think that can mean that people have very broad visual references for things. Whether or not people are less interested, I don't know. I think that's the role of a curator and the role of the whole team here, is to show how these paintings that so inspire and delight us can be something that can interest anyone. And that's the importance of our interpretation, the sort of storytelling that we do here, is finding ways to capture people's imaginations. So perhaps I'm optimistic in thinking that no, interest isn't less. But access and that interpretation and storytelling is so important to directing people's attentions here, not always necessarily at their phones.
I think if you brought your family here, if you brought young children here, this is so different from anything else that you would ever see, Phil. I mean, imagine walking in here as a 4-year-old, 5-year-old. I'm overwhelmed. I'm not saying how old I am.
Well, as the mother of a 4-year-old and almost 1-year-old, it's a brilliant place to bring children. The rooms are huge. Yes. We allow buggies in the spaces. We've got a lot of activities for children, particularly in this year around Turner. Lots of activities, both indoors and outdoors, and it's a great space. You know, there's so much detail in this room. Whether you're pointing out the little pigs in the front, or the deer here, or the lobsters that you can see in some of the carvings, or the violin in the Gwyn and Gibbons carving. So I think it's a great place to sort of introduce children to art, and it's an important place within our culture.
We mustn't finish without talking about the Gibbons. But first, I have a question, which is, so Laura, as preparation for today, watched again Mr. Turner.
Oh, yeah, I did, yeah.
I've watched Mr. Turner. And I'm sure they did their research. And we've made films. We did a previous series called Great Artists. We made a film about Turner. I've done Turner exhibitions before, shorter films. I got slightly frustrated with the film and the way he was portrayed as almost monosyllabic and gruff and really quite abusive in certain ways. I did wonder, as someone who's specialised in that period, who works with Turners, and bearing in mind that he would have been an invited guest here, so you kind of think, if he was really monosyllabic or unpleasant, would he have been invited back time and time again? Do you think that is the Turner in your mind different to the way that Timothy Spall portrayed him? Or do you think, well, that's partly how he was, but also he must have been able to converse and be highly intellectual? And
Yeah. I mean, it's such a good question, because again, I think when artists or any sort of historical figure is portrayed on screen, there's always an approach that the director or screenwriter is taking. And I think when you study an artist, you start to build your own picture of what they were like and what they sounded like and how they spoke to others. So I don't know. I mean, yes and no. I think when I think about the aspects of him as a person that I've been looking at, in the run up to this anniversary year, particularly with that exhibition, for me, it's the focus has so much been on his mind as an artist, and those things that delighted his eye that still now we're looking at in some instances in exactly the same space that he was standing. There are all these amazing watercolours that he made of the interior of Petworth as well. So for me, it's that process of standing in a space like this and thinking, I'm looking at what he was looking at in the same space. This is my response to it. Was it the same as his? Can I see any evidence of that in what he was producing around that same time? And then again, about that relationship with the third Earl and how they might have spoken to one another. So I suppose in a way, I've been thinking less about the sort of day-to-day and more about that sort of artistic mind and his intellect, and that sort of conversation about the art. That's the sort of picture of him and his personality that I have in my mind now, certainly. Yeah.
We're having exactly the same situation with Caravaggio. Caravaggio is always portrayed in a certain way because of his nocturnal activities and throwing artichokes at waiters and killing somebody and going on the run. But if you look at the paintings, if you look at the history of his relationships with the ecclesiastical and the secular nobility of Rome, you kind of realise that's just one small part of his personality. And that individual that you might have thought you knew would not have painted those paintings like that. Mm-hmm. And all these artists, and it's true, we've done composer films too, like Mozart and Beethoven, they are so avaricious for knowledge that often the way they've been portrayed for dramatic purposes, which ultimately means for commercial reasons, is actually doing them a disservice.
I think there's an element sometimes of, in order to sort of secure someone's place in history, there's got to be that sort of one-liner, that thing that, a sort of tagline almost about what makes that person important. And it's not that I think it's not interesting, or it's not that I think it's irrelevant. I think it's all good if it draws people's minds to these artists, and that's wonderful. But I think we can never put ourselves exactly in someone's shoes. We can never truly understand how they were feeling about something, as much in the present day as the past. So I think we all, as we get to know these different artists or composers or playwrights or politicians, that it's us building a picture of someone in the way that we would do, if you meet them for the first time today.
The only thing I was thinking, it is something that people always want to pick up on, though, isn't it? Because you've got one thing to then look towards. With Turner's paintings, as he progressed, they became more like atmospheric and stuff. Was him and the Earl, did they stay friends to the end?
So the third Earl died in 1837.
Oh, okay.
And Turner stopped coming to Petworth after that.
Oh, did he?
So that relationship was the sort of crucial thing for him, really.
Right.
And so, it's a sort of very long period that he was coming here. It was sort of, 30 plus years. And so I think that death of his great supporter and patron really saw the end of his relationship with Petworth as well.
Could you just explain why this room is called the Carved Room, and therefore talk a bit about Gibbons?
Yes. It's called a carved room because the walls are lined with pretty sensational carving.
Unbelievable.
Most of which is by the celebrated 17th century court designer and carver, Gibbons. And you mentioned the pairs of full-length portraits above the Turner paintings. And you can see Gibbons' work here above those. And so we're standing here above a basket of flowers where you can see carved flowers through the basket, and sort of, fruit and flower petals bending over with this incredible fineness. Further down the room, there's this wonderful coming together of a group of carving which includes sheet music from Henry Purcell's The Fairy Queen, which was composed in 1692 to celebrate the wedding anniversary of William and Mary. So it's a way of the six Duke and Duchess of Somerset, who owned Petworth at that time and commissioned Gibbons to carve for this room, of showing their kind of allegiance and support of the royal couple.
And the frames were done by him as well?
There was another carver also working in here called John Selden, who, as far as we know, didn't work outside Sussex. He was involved in other parts of the house as well, so there are his contributions here too. And then there's a further layer of additional carvings in the 19th century by Ritson. So when the third Earl, as I mentioned earlier, extended the room, knocking the two rooms together to create this one enlarged carved room, Ritson was also employed at that point to fill the gaps as well. So it was a huge undertaking. And so even though the room looks different to how it looks when it was first designed and first installed in the late 17th century, it's this wonderful coming together, which again you can just feel so profoundly in a country house setting, of those layers of history. And I think that's what makes it so special. But I think it's the sheer quality of these carvings, the carvings that you can see, by the same artists at Hampton Court and in some of the city churches. It's unbelievably fine, and it's so three-dimensional. So when you come in here, and perhaps if you're listening to the podcast without seeing the room, you can think, oh, it's all about the Turners. It is about the Turners, but it's also about this incredible scheme that these paintings sit within.
They are extraordinary. It's a bit tangential and a bit of an anecdote, but I made a film about the Battle of Trafalgar, or a film about Nelson. And I went to the Admiralty, and they have a room there where they would sit, which has Gibbons on the wall, which was fantastic to see then. But what they also had was a weather vane on the roof. And that came down into the room, and it would show within the room on the wall, it would show the direction of the wind. And they would sit there waiting, and when the wind was in the right direction, they'd say, okay, the fleet can leave. And they'd send by horse, they'd send a message down to Portsmouth and say, right, go. And off the fleet would go. It was
that is super. Yeah.
It was fantastic. Oh, look.
Have you had film crews in here at all? Have you had
We have. In fact, Napoleon was the last film that was partly filmed here.
Okay.
In the grand stairs, which we looked at earlier on, painted with murals by Louis Laguerre.
When he comes down the stairs, yes.
Yeah, when he comes down the stairs. It looks so different. We had an exercise of trying to spot Petworth in the trailer, and it appeared all the time that everything looked so different and so transformed. It was really hard to do.
They did a battle scene on the South Downs near where we are in Brighton. You'd never have known. And they basically had a few soldiers rushing down this slope.
Amazing.
Once the CGI got to work, it was like a whole army. You mentioned, I've got a couple of final questions. As we turn now, we can see it's raining outside, which is actually really rather nice, but they physically would walk. There are no doors here, so they would actually just walk through the window frame.
If we walk over to the window, you can see as you look down a couple of steps that take you onto the terrace. And when the house was originally built, these windows were slightly shorter. And if you go out into the park and look back at the house, you can see that difference in length from the ground floor to the first floor. And similarly, when the house was first built or sort of rebuilt, what we're looking at here looked very different. There was a courtyard with a drive coming into it and a large turning circle. There was very formal planting. And this was all swept away in the mid-18th century by Capability Brown, giving us the view that we see today.
For those that want to see, they have to come here and look for themselves. But if they're listening to this in Australia or New Zealand, or, we've got people listening all around the world, is there a website where some of this is... Or what is the website? I'm sure there's a website.
The National Trust website, all of the houses, Petworth included, have their own set of web pages there. And we've got, we're just in the process of renewing those actually. So we've got a sort of long history of Petworth. I've spoken quite a lot about the 17th century onwards, but the history really goes back almost 900 years. So there's a good overview of the families who've been here. The house has passed by through inheritance from 1150 onwards, through the Percy, Seymour and Wyndham families, until it came to the trust in 1947. So there's a lot of information there. There's dedicated information and resources about Turner, particularly highlighting some of the activities that we have for families, information about the exhibition. And then also on our social media channels, on our Instagram, there's a lot of information about the show, with some sort of sneak peeks of what's in there.
And plenty of books, catalogues.
Plenty of books. There's a lot that's written. There was a catalogue, I think it's out of print, but you can still get it online, called Turner at Petworth, which was part of the sort of restoration project in the carved room in 2002. And that really is a deep dive into Turner's relationship with Petworth that I'd really recommend. And also the collections at Tate. There's a huge amount of Petworth-related material at Tate, so you can go and have a look there to see more too.
Yeah, beautiful.
Emily, thank you so much. It's been absolutely fantastic. We're now going to have a proper look around. And as I say, if you're listening to this before November the 16th, do come to see Emily's and Petworth's exhibition on Turner. And then from November at Tate, we have Turner and Constable. And our film on Turner and Constable will be coming out February 2026. If you can't wait till then, we do have films in the Great Artists series available through the 7th-art.com website, on Constable, on Turner. And I think we've done some exhibition films which might be there too. So thank you again, Emily, and we'll be back soon with another Painting of the Week.
Thank you for listening to the Painting of the Week podcast. For more information, please visit our website at 7th-art.com or contact us by emailing info@7th-art.com. See you next time.